Time to remind them who built the throne.
The jet engines were screaming behind me as I stood on the tarmac holding my suitcase. Through the aircraft windows, I could see my wife's executive team already popping champagne bottles and laughing. They'd just closed a massive investor pitch, and everyone was celebrating. Everyone except me, because I wasn't invited on the plane. My wife Lauren had just delivered the presentation of her career. Her company Dataflow Industries had won over a huge multinational client with promises of revolutionary AI integration and data infrastructure. The board members were ecstatic, climbing the stairs into the private jet with their branded gift bags and half-empty champagne flutes. I watched them disappear inside one by one. When I'd tried to board with everyone else, Lauren stopped me at the bottom of the stairs. Her sunglasses were already down, her voice cold and performative for the crowd behind her. Take a commercial flight home. We need the seats for actual team members. A few people laughed. Her chief marketing officer actually smirked at me. Then they all filed past while I stood there with my overnight bag like forgotten luggage. The door sealed shut with a hydraulic hiss, and the jet just sat there on the runway for a minute. I could see silhouettes through the windows, toasting each other, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Here's what none of them knew, what Lauren herself had conveniently forgotten. I wasn't just some consultant husband who smiled at company parties. 13 years ago, I was the person who architected every single patent Dataflow was built on. When Lauren and I first met, she was ambitious but directionless. I introduced her to my former business partner, Raymond, who was launching a tech startup. I didn't just make an introduction, though. I structured the entire intellectual property framework from the ground up. Every product they pitched, every quarterly projection, every glowing tech article written about Dataflow's innovation was built on language I'd written, patents I'd drafted, systems I'd designed. But I did it all through an anonymous trust entity with a coded designation. Nobody at Dataflow knew my real identity in the legal chain except Raymond, and he'd retired 4 years ago without telling anyone. Why hide? Initially, it was Lauren's idea. She said it would be cleaner for her reputation if people didn't know her spouse was embedded in the company's legal foundation. She wanted to be seen as a self-made CEO, not someone whose husband built her empire. I agreed because I genuinely didn't want the spotlight. I liked the work itself, the technical challenge of creating airtight patent structures, and the public recognition meant nothing to me. But I'm not stupid. When I built that IP framework, I included protections. Deep in the supplemental filing documents, past all the standard legal language that nobody ever reads carefully, I embedded Clause 14. It was elegant in its simplicity. If any founding author from the trust entity resigned, all associated licensing rights would automatically suspend within exactly 72 hours. No negotiation window, no buyout provision, no emergency override. Just immediate revocation of every patent tied to that trust. I was the only founding author, which meant I was the only person who could pull that trigger. Standing on that tarmac in the heat, watching them celebrate inside that jet while I held a suitcase like some kind of servant they'd dismissed, something fundamental shifted in me. This wasn't the first time Lauren had treated me as invisible, but it was the most public, the most humiliating. And in that moment, I realized I was done protecting someone who saw me as a prop in her success story. I pulled out my phone, stepped back from the yellow safety line, and dialed my attorney. The call connected instantly, no ringing. "Execute Clause 14 resignation protocol," I said calmly. There was a pause on the other end, then my attorney's voice came back measured and professional. "You're authorizing resignation under the authorship withdrawal provision? You understand the cascade effect this triggers?" "I'm counting on it," I replied. "Understood. Processing now." I hung up and walked toward the black sedan that had been waiting near a nearby hangar. Behind me, the jet finally started its takeoff roll. By the time it lifted into the sky, the legal documents were already filed. The countdown had begun. I checked into a hotel about 20 minutes from the airport. The room was aggressively beige, the kind of corporate space designed for business travelers who never stay long enough to notice anything. I didn't bother unpacking my suitcase, just set up my laptop on the desk and entered a one-time access code from a security key I carried. The screen required a retinal scan before displaying anything. When it finally loaded, I was looking at a simple dashboard labeled TechCore IP Holdings, with my trust entity designation listed as primary author. There were 3 folders waiting. One contained my formal resignation letter. Another held the Clause 14 trigger notification that would go to every stakeholder. The third was a media disclosure file that would quietly feed information to specific journalists who knew how to connect dots. I selected all 3 files, dragged them to the encrypted submission field, and hovered over the send button for maybe 5 seconds. Then I clicked it. The screen blinked once. Transmitted. Countdown initiated 72 Honchi. I closed the laptop and waited. The first article appeared 47 minutes later on a tech industry blog. Key legal partner exits TechCore IP Holdings, with a brief note citing anonymous sources about a major foundational shift in Dataflow's patent structure. No names, no photos, but anyone who understood IP law would immediately grasp the implications. Within 2 hours, 3 more blogs picked it up. Then Twitter. I watched the story spread in real time, refreshing pages every few minutes. This wasn't about rage or revenge. Those are sloppy emotions that leave evidence. This was about precision and consequences. I'd built something, they'd taken it for granted, and now they were about to learn what happens when the foundation walks away. Around 90 minutes into the flight, Lauren's phone started buzzing. I know because she told me later, in one of those desperate voicemail messages. Their general counsel called first, his voice tight with panic. "We're seeing unusual activity in the patent registration system. Someone just filed resignation documents from TechCore IP Holdings. The trust entity shows movement." Lauren apparently didn't understand immediately. What does that mean? It means whoever held authorship rights just withdrew them. If that person was integral to your core patents, your licensing agreements could be compromised. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "Your husband, he did some consulting work early on, right? What exactly was his role?" The cabin had gone quiet by then. Other board members were checking their phones, seeing the same alerts, the same blog posts starting to circulate. Mark, their most legally savvy board member, had pulled up the original patent filings on his tablet. His face went pale as he scrolled through the documentation. "Lauren," he said slowly, "your husband isn't listed by name, but this trust entity is coded as co-author on literally every patent we've filed since founding. If he's the trust signatory and he just resigned, we've got a serious problem." Someone showed her their phone screen. The headline read, "TechCore IP structure faces major legal withdrawal. Licensing impact unknown." Lauren stared at it like the words were in a foreign language. She tried calling me 17 times during the rest of that flight. I didn't answer once. By the time their jet landed, the situation had escalated. Their legal team had done emergency research and discovered the full scope of Clause 14. At 12:03 a.m., every board member received an identical email with the subject line, "Clause 14 Authorship Resignation Consequences." The body of the message was clinical and devastating. It explained that, per the foundational agreement filed in 2011 and revised through silent amendments in 2015, a resignation by an author class signatory would trigger automatic suspension of all associated licensing rights within 72 hours. The email listed every affected asset, their core processing framework, their predictive analytics engine, their entire embedded system suite. Everything they'd pitched to investors that afternoon was suddenly on a countdown to legal obsolescence. Their lead attorney, patched in by video from his vacation house, delivered the worst news. This clause was designed as a termination mechanism with no reversal option. You'd need the original author to reinstate, and given the circumstances, I doubt that's happening. Lauren apparently lost it at that point. Can't we just pay him off? Negotiate? There has to be something. The clause doesn't allow for financial remediation, the attorney replied. This is structural. Once triggered, it executes automatically. You have 72 hours before you're technically infringing on IP you no longer have rights to use. Mark asked the obvious question. What happens if we don't comply? Lawsuits, cease and desist orders, investor panic, client withdrawals. You'll be operating on borrowed technology you don't own. The stock price alone will crater. Someone mentioned that 3 of their 5 major contracts were built entirely on those patents. Half their projected quarterly revenue was tied to products they'd lose access to in 3 days. The room descended into crisis mode, laptops opening, emergency calls being placed, crisis management language being drafted. Lauren tried calling me again and again. When I didn't answer, she started leaving voice messages. The first few were angry and confused. By the fourth one, her voice was cracking. I don't understand what you're doing. If this is about the airplane, if I hurt your feelings, then okay, we can talk about it. But don't destroy everything we built. Please, just call me back. I listened to that message once, then deleted it. She still didn't get it. This wasn't about hurt feelings or a petty slight. This was about 13 years of being erased while someone else took credit for my work. It was about being treated as decoration while they built an empire on my intellectual labor. The tarmac was just the moment I stopped pretending any of it was acceptable. The next morning, I woke up in that beige hotel room and did something I hadn't done in years. I sat by the window with coffee and actually relaxed. No meetings to prepare for, no events where I'd smile quietly in the corner while Lauren networked. Just stillness and the knowledge that somewhere across town, an entire boardroom was imploding. My phone started getting messages from old colleagues, people I'd worked with a decade ago who disappeared once I went anonymous. A former IP litigator I used to collaborate with sent a simple text. Did you finally do it? Another contact, a compliance specialist from Switzerland, wrote, watching with interest. Let me know if you need anything. But the real chaos started when a journalist named Rebecca Chen published a deep investigation piece. She'd somehow tracked down the archived legal filings from 2011, documents that showed the trust entity formation coinciding exactly with data flow's incorporation. She'd found witness signatures, timestamp logs, and most damning of all, she'd uncovered an old photograph. The image was grainy black and white, showing me younger and less polished, shaking hands with Raymond in Dataflow's original office when they still used folding chairs and had paper signs taped to walls. The caption read, "Sources indicate he wasn't merely a spouse. He was there from day one." That photograph detonated whatever remained of Lauren's credibility. Because she'd spent years telling people she'd built Dataflow from nothing, that she'd fought her way up in a male-dominated industry through pure determination. And here was evidence that her husband had literally introduced her to the founder and architected the entire legal foundation. The optics were catastrophic. The story went viral within hours. Someone created a hashtag, Clausegate, which quickly evolved into memes and parody accounts. One popular post showed an animated figure being left on a tarmac while a plane took off, overlaid with fake stock charts, nosediving, and citations from Claus on another fake account. Pretending to be me posted cryptic contract excerpts with captions like, "You don't lose the game when the board laughs at you. You lose it when they don't know whose board they're standing on." By afternoon, tech industry Twitter was completely consumed by the story. Dataflow's stock had dropped 22%. 4 major investors had quietly withdrawn. And most devastating of all, their huge acquisition deal with a European conglomerate had collapsed. The buyer's legal team had spotted the IP vulnerability and pulled out immediately. Lauren tried reaching out to people she thought were my contacts. She called Marcus, an IP attorney I'd worked with for years. No response. She tried Helena, a retired equity partner from a firm in Amsterdam who used to consult on my complex cases. Helena actually picked up. "I need your help," Lauren said, her voice desperate. "This clause he triggered, it's destroying everything. Please, just tell me how to stop it." There was a long pause before Helena spoke. "He warned you." "What?" "He came to me years ago," Helena continued, her voice measured and clinical. "We reviewed every clause, every signature, every protective measure. He wasn't building a company structure, Lauren. He was building an exit strategy. And he told you about it, multiple times." "I didn't know it was this serious," Lauren stammered. "You weren't listening. That's different." The line went dead. Lauren apparently drove straight to Dataflow's downtown legal office after that call, nearly causing an accident on the way. She stormed into their chief counsel's office, demanding solutions. Gregory, a sharp attorney who never missed details, already had the complete file spread across his desk, annotated in red marker. "Can we fix this?" she demanded. Gregory looked at her with something between pity and frustration. "You're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether we can fix it. It's why you ignored this for 13 years. He slid the documents toward her. Inside were the trust certifications, the authorship validations, digital signature logs with timestamps, and right on top, a printed copy of Clause 14 with its trigger conditions clearly outlined. He holds author class rights. The trust entity doesn't carry his name publicly, but his digital signature is authenticated and witnessed. Legally, he's the architect. Functionally, you built your entire company on his foundation. So what do we do? Lauren asked, her voice smaller now. Unless you can convince him to reinstate his authorship, which seems unlikely given how this started, you're looking at systematic collapse. Every contract dependent on those patents becomes legally questionable. Clients will walk, investors will flee, and competitors will move in. The following Monday, Dataflow held an emergency board meeting. The atmosphere was funereal. Nobody touched the catered breakfast. Mark arrived late without apologizing, which told everyone how serious things had gotten. Lauren stood at the front of the conference room, trying to project confidence she clearly didn't feel, while behind her a screen displayed nothing but red arrows and alarming headlines. Legal is working on an emergency appeal framework, she began, her voice barely steady. Mark cut her off. Stop, just stop. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You told us he was just your husband, that he did some minor consulting years ago. He never explained the full extent of his involvement, Lauren said defensively. He kept things separate. Angela, their newest board member brought in for regulatory expertise, spoke up quietly. He didn't have to explain. That's why you're the CEO, to know what's in your company's foundation. And clearly you didn't. The words hung there, heavy and accusatory. Someone's phone buzzed, then another. A message came through from Investor Relations. Senior partner from Meridian Capital just pulled their commitment. Acquisition deal officially terminated. They cite IP instability as primary concern. Tracy, the marketing VP, who'd laughed on the tarmac, looked genuinely scared now. We promised a 5-year roadmap to clients based on technology we apparently don't own anymore. How do we come back from that? We can negotiate directly with him, Lauren said, though she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Offer reinstatement terms, financial compensation, whatever it takes. Mark shook his head slowly. You left him on a tarmac in front of everyone. You publicly humiliated the one person who actually owns your company's foundation. And you think he's going to negotiate? Angela added, he's not interested in money. He structured this as a permanent exit mechanism. This was planned. Gregory from legal confirmed via video call what everyone was beginning to realize. The clause has no reversal provision. It's a one-way door. Once triggered, it executes automatically. You'd need his voluntary reinstatement, and nothing in the legal structure requires him to grant that. The room fell into suffocating silence. Outside the glass walls, the rest of the office buzzed with normal Monday activity. But inside that boardroom, it felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Then, around 2:40 p.m., Lauren's assistant sent an urgent message. Check Tech Daily now. The headline read, The Silent Partner Who Walked Away and Took Everything with Him. Rebecca Chen had published a follow-up investigation that was even more detailed. She'd found the original incorporation documents showing that I'd introduced Lauren to Raymond. She'd interviewed former employees who remembered me being deeply involved in early patent strategy. She'd even tracked down the witness signatures on the trust formation and confirmed they were legitimate attorneys who'd worked with me for years. The article dismantled Lauren's entire public narrative. Every interview where she'd talked about building Dataflow from scratch, every profile piece celebrating her as a self-made CEO, it all looked like either self-delusion or deliberate deception. The comments section was brutal. By evening, Clausegate was the top trending topic across multiple platforms. Someone had created a parody LinkedIn account in my name posting fake corporate wisdom about protecting your intellectual property. Another meme showed a boardroom with the caption, When you realize your husband wasn't a houseplant, he was the house. Lauren's board called another video emergency session. Nobody was smiling now. Even Tracy, usually the eternal optimist, looked defeated. We need to discuss succession options, Mark said bluntly. The optics here are untenable. Angela was more direct. You need to resign, Lauren. It's the only move that shows accountability. If I resign in the middle of a crisis, it looks like admission of guilt, Lauren protested. You are guilty, Mark said. Maybe not legally, but definitely professionally. You built an entire company on IP you didn't understand or properly audit. That's executive negligence at minimum. Gregory jumped in from his video feed. The market needs to see consequences. Right now, Dataflow looks like a company led by someone who either lied about her role or was catastrophically incompetent about her own company structure. Either way, investors want her gone. Lauren sat there as her career imploded around her. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, most of them from reporters or investors demanding statements. Even her own mother had texted, "I saw the article. Was he really that involved this whole time?" Within 48 hours, she'd submitted her resignation. The press release used careful language about unexpected transitions and strategic reassessment, but everyone knew what it meant. She'd been forced out by her own board because she'd underestimated the wrong person. A week after everything imploded, Lauren tracked me down. I'd gone back to the small house I'd grown up in, about 3 hours north of the city. It was quiet there, away from the corporate chaos and media circus. I was sitting on the porch when her car pulled up the gravel driveway. She looked terrible. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her usual polished appearance completely gone. The confident executive posture had collapsed into something hollow and desperate. She got out of the car and just stood there for a moment, like she wasn't sure she had permission to approach. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice cracking. "You should have told me who you really were. I'd been expecting this." I went inside and came back with a folder, thick and brown and unassuming. I set it on the porch railing between us. "What's this?" she asked. "Everything you never bothered to read." She opened it slowly. Inside were printed emails with timestamps going back years. Messages where I'd sent her the patent documentation, the trust structure, detailed explanations of my role. Every single one showed "not opened" or had her replies saying things like "sounds good" and "I trust your judgment," before immediately changing the subject to her next board presentation. There were also printed conversations where I'd explicitly tried to discuss the IP framework and she'd cut me off. "I've got lawyers for that technical stuff," she'd said more than once. "You don't need to worry about the boring details." She stared at the documents, her hands trembling slightly. "I thought you were being supportive, staying in the background by choice." "I was being invisible because you needed me to be," I said. "Your whole brand was the self-made CEO who fought her way up. Having a husband who actually built your company's foundation didn't fit that narrative. So you just stopped seeing me as anything except a prop for networking events." "That's not fair," she whispered. But even she didn't sound convinced. "You left me on a tarmac, Lauren, in front of your entire board. You made a joke about me flying commercial while you all celebrated on a jet powered by my patents. That wasn't just dismissive, it was cruel. And it was the final confirmation of something I'd known for years. I didn't matter to you, my work didn't matter. I was just an accessory." She sat down on the porch steps, the folder still in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. If I could take back that moment, I would." "The tarmac wasn't the cause," I said. "It was just the moment I stopped pretending. You'd been erasing me for years. Every board meeting where you presented my work as our legal team's research. Every interview where you talked about building everything yourself. Every time I tried to discuss company direction and you told me to stay in my lane. This wasn't about one bad moment. This was about 13 years of systematic disrespect." She looked up at me and I could see real understanding finally dawning. Not just regret about consequences, but actual comprehension of what she'd done. "Is it permanent?" she asked quietly. "The clause? Unless I choose to reinstate, yes. And I won't." "What about the company? All those people's jobs?" "Dataflow will be fine," I said. "They'll restructure, sell off assets, pivot to different technology. It won't be your empire anymore. But it'll survive. What won't survive is the illusion that you built something from nothing. Because you didn't. You built it on a foundation someone else created, and you never even acknowledged that." She stayed there for almost an hour, not saying much, just sitting with the weight of it all. When she finally left, she looked smaller somehow, like the realization had physically diminished her. What I didn't tell her that day was that I'd already signed a consulting agreement with Mindtech Solutions, Dataflow's biggest competitor. I'd reached out to them 2 weeks before the tarmac incident, actually. That moment just accelerated my timeline. Mindtech had been trying to crack similar technology for years, but couldn't figure out the architecture. Now they had the original designer on their team. 3 weeks after I triggered Clause 14, Mindtech made an acquisition offer for Dataflow's remaining assets. not a merger or a partnership. A hostile takeover dressed as a rescue package. They offered 40 cents on the dollar for everything that wasn't tied to the disputed patents, which was maybe 30% of the company's total value. Dataflow's board had a choice: accept the humiliating buyout or face bankruptcy within 6 months when the 72-hour window closed, and they'd be operating on IP they had no rights to use. They took the buyout. They had no other option. Lauren wasn't even part of those negotiations. She'd already resigned, and the interim CEO they'd brought in wanted nothing to do with her. The person who'd left me on a tarmac while laughing with her board was now unemployed, publicly humiliated, and watching everything she thought she'd built get sold off in pieces. The final board meeting where they signed the acquisition documents was surreal. I was there as Mindtech's Chief Intellectual Property Officer, my new title. Better pay, actual respect, a team that listened when I talked about legal strategy. Lauren was there too, technically required to be present for the final signature on some historical paperwork. We didn't speak, didn't even make eye contact. She sat at one end of the long conference table, looking diminished and defeated, while I sat at the other end representing the company that had just absorbed her empire for spare change. Her former executives, the ones who'd laughed and toasted on that jet, were now updating their LinkedIn profiles and reaching out to recruiters. Nobody was laughing anymore. Mark, the board member who'd finally called her out, approached me afterward. "I want you to know I tried to get her to audit the IP structure 2 years ago. She told me it was handled and not to worry about it." "I know," I said. "It's all documented." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, this is the most comprehensive corporate dismantling I've ever witnessed. The efficiency of it is almost beautiful." "It wasn't about efficiency," I replied. "It was about consequences. When you treat people as disposable, sometimes they dispose of you first." Lauren tried to reach out one more time about a month later. A long email about closure and understanding. I read it once and didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She'd had 13 years to see me as a partner, to respect what I contributed, to treat me like I mattered. She'd chosen not to. The consequences of that choice were now her problem, not mine. These days, I hear she's rebuilding her career somewhere, at a mid-sized firm. No private jets, no boardrooms, no tech daily profiles. Just the long climb back from the bottom, which is where everyone starts when they don't have someone else's foundation to stand on. As for me, I'm doing better than I have in years. Mindtech actually values my expertise. They ask questions, review my recommendations, include me in strategic decisions. It's amazing what respect feels like when you've gone without it for so long. I sign every patent document with my full name now. Complete transparency. No anonymous trusts, no hidden architecture. If my name is on the work, everyone knows it. The business schools have apparently started teaching Clause 14 as a case study in intellectual property protection and corporate due diligence. Lauren's name comes up in those discussions as a cautionary example. The executive who didn't know her own company's foundation is how one professor phrased it in an article I read. Sometimes I think about that moment on the tarmac, watching that jet sit there with everyone inside laughing and celebrating. In that instant, they thought they had all the power. They thought I was nothing, just some spouse who could be dismissed without consequence. They were standing on my work, toasting with my patents, building careers on my architecture, and they genuinely believed it was all theirs. The funny thing is, Clause 14 was always there. For 13 years, it sat in those legal documents waiting to be noticed. Lauren could have read it any time. She could have asked questions, sought clarification, understood what she was actually building her career on. But she was too busy being important, too focused on her image as a self-made CEO to bother with the technical details. Foundations are funny things. You don't notice them when they're working properly. They're invisible, taken for granted, assumed to be permanent. But foundations aren't decorative. They're structural, and when they're removed, you don't get much warning before everything above them falls. I learned that lesson the hard way by building something nobody appreciated. Lauren learned it the expensive way by losing everything she thought she owned. Different lessons, same principle. Respect the foundation, or become a cautionary tale about what happens when you don't. These days, when I'm working late at Mindtech's headquarters, sometimes I look out at the city lights and think about parallel universes. In one version, Lauren brings me on that jet. She introduces me to her board properly, acknowledges my contributions, treats me like a partner instead of a prop. In that universe, data flow is still thriving, and Clause 14 never gets triggered. But we don't live in that universe. We live in this one, where actions have consequences and humiliation has a price. Where someone who spent 13 years being invisible finally stepped into the light, and everyone else discovered they'd been standing in his shadow the whole time. I don't regret it. Not the clause, not the timing, not the outcome. Some people might call it vindictive or disproportionate, but those people have never spent more than a decade watching someone take credit for their work, then being literally left behind while they celebrated with your achievements. Clause 14 wasn't revenge. It was acknowledgement. It was saying, you couldn't erase me legally, even if you managed to erase me personally. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Not the company's collapse, not Lauren's fall from grace, not even the new position at MindTech. What mattered was being seen, being recognized, having my name attached to my work. Everything else was just the natural consequence of finally demanding that respect after 13 years of being denied it. The last I heard through mutual acquaintances, Lauren tells people she's learned from her mistakes, that she understands now about respecting partnerships and not taking people for granted. Maybe that's true. People can change when they lose everything. But I'll never know for sure, because I cut all contact completely. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt. Some lessons are best learned alone. As for that Clause 14 tab at the bar, yeah, I actually went there once. Small place downtown with amber lighting and old blues music. The bartender asked if I wanted to start a tab, and on a whim, I said yes and gave that name. He just nodded and wrote it down, no questions asked. Sometimes I wonder if Lauren ever heard about that detail, about me claiming the clause as a name in some anonymous bar. I hope she did. I hope she understood it meant I was done being anonymous, done hiding in the shadows of someone else's success story. I'm the foundation now. Not the building people photograph and admire, but the structure everything else relies on. And foundations, when properly acknowledged and respected, can support incredible things. But disrespect them, take them for granted, leave them behind on a tarmac while you celebrate above them. Well, then you find out what it feels like when the ground disappears beneath your feet. That's not revenge, that's just physics.